Why are EV prices crashing so much, though? Why is that market been hit so far?
Man, if you want a good used car cheap and you can deal with the electric thing, those things are
I've been looking at Teslas lately. The prices that they're selling for,
wild.
You sold a Tesla Model Y that was like almost brand new with the XPEL, paint protection. I think it was like 33 grand.
We're selling Plaids in the 50s.
Yes.
That's 1,000 horsepower.
Yeah.
We're selling Lucid Airs for half off. That car's a year old, Like, it is wild what has happened to the EV market. It's almost too good to not to, at some price, no matter what you think of EVs politically or personally, at some price you start to be like,
worth it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, the Plaid at 50 seems like such a good deal for a 2022 Plaid.
I did not know that was happening. That breaks my heart.
And they're not.
You know what? Jack has a history of buying
at peaks. It's like an ongoing joke of the channel. I decided finally, after years of waiting, because delayed gratification. No, I'll buy it when I'm more financially comfortable, when I have a cushion. I finally shelled out the money to buy a Tesla Model Y. And I spent I think it was completely the base. I used existing inventory, though, to even get it cheaper. Yep. And the only thing that I changed was I had white interior. And I got the long range on the Tesla Model Y.
And you didn't use my referral code.
I used my dad's. So, yeah. You want to get upset at that. That's
whatever.
I paid 58 grand for it.
Plus tax.
When was
No, it was 58 all in.
When was
all in? This was September of not last year, but the prior year.
It's 2022.
Or maybe it was September of last year. It was September of last year, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, to be clear, that's still a great car. You should just keep driving it.
I love the car.
At the end of the day,
it's worth 50, 58, whatever I paid for it. But it's, depressing knowing that I could have gotten a Plaid or something like that.
It is crazy how those cars have lost value. And to be honest, the Teslas, although they have lost significant value, there's some other ones out there that are even wilder. I mean, I look at the Lucid numbers. I look at Hummer EVs, those giant things.
I remember when those were selling.
We sold one for $300 or close. And those are $100,000 trucks now. If you're lucky, you might be able to get it under like the 85, 95, depending on mileage, stuff like that. That's a big hit. The heavy hitter guys who wanted the first one and paid $300, those guys lost $200 grand in value in 24 months, probably. I mean, that's really a lot.
Why are they crashing more than any other car? Why?
I think at the end of the day, the demand for EVs is heavily subsidized by the government incentives. And the demand is just not as strong as the government wishes that it was. And the automakers are heavily subsidized to make EVs because they also get significant incentives. And they can pass those incentives on to the consumer. I mean, they can apply the consumer incentives to the lease payments and get the leases lower. And so there's real benefit for them. But at the end of the day, the primary market is propped up artificially by these incentives. The secondary market doesn't have incentives. And so that's where you see the actual value of these cars. And it is yikes. But if you're interested in a used one, it really legitimately does start to become kind of appealing. A Rivian at 40 some is like, that's kind of, I mean, those are cool. Those are cool trucks. The first original ones at 850 horsepower. They're off road like crazy. They're nice inside.
So what's going to happen when the government subsidies end on new EVs? Or do you think it's going to end? Because my thought, Tesla can't sell these cars in the 40s or 50s or even 60s anymore if there's no government incentive.
It's not to get political. It's tough for the automakers to do this slingshotting thing between Trump, Biden, Trump. They're making long-range product decisions, right? I mean, the product decisions they're making are 5-10 years out based on existing incentives. They don't know. And now if the incentives go away, I mean, we're talking about probably billions of dollars developing cars for incentives that may not exist. And that's a tough situation. I feel bad for them. Almost everybody is in this boat. I keep hearing this from every automaker contact I have. I was at Porsche the other day dropping off my Crow GT for service, and I was asking about Macan EV because there's an electric Macan now. And they were like, we got inbound that aren't sold. And that's a brand new, I mean, that car came, I've seen 3 on the road. That's a brand new Porsche this is in California where inbound ones aren't sold. Can you imagine in Texas and other places where EVs aren't as hot? And then you take away incentives and it's like, the whole structure, the automakers are just going to have to do a huge pivot. And who knows? In 4 years, things might completely change and then they have to figure out how to pivot back. And it's like, this has just gotten out of control. And I was very disappointed. The Biden administration changed the incentives drastically, even from what they were before. So you had an incentive, then you had less incentives, then you had changed incentives. And it was like, very difficult for the automakers to really keep up with.
What were some of those incentives? My understanding was that it was the $7,500 tax credit, then they got rid of it, and then they brought it back, and then something about depreciation.
Well, what ended up happening, when Biden's administration brought back the significant incentive, they had all these means tests. The car had to be built in the United States. You couldn't earn more than a certain amount of money.
Yes.
Like it was income tied. And some of that stuff made sense, but the problem was you had to jump through all these hoops to get the incentive. In the past, they were like, we just want to get EVs out the door. So we're just going to give everybody $7,500. Well, when you start putting 7 different things on it, it's like, well, that actually, now it's like a maze for the consumer to try to figure out which cars qualify. And also it just lowers the likelihood of this accomplishing the stated goal of getting EVs out the door.
Yeah. So if you had a magic wand and you could do whatever you want to when it comes to EVs in terms of incentives or no incentives or really anything to spur up the auto market, what would you do?
This is not a popular opinion in the world, but I would let capitalism sort it out. I hate to say it. I think ultimately, I know it's funny.
That's probably the right answer, though.
I think the problem is, though, that like we do have an environmental issue that capitalism probably wouldn't sort out until like the very end when the polarized caps have melted and then we're all screwed. And it's like, oh, maybe it's buy an electric car. But like the current situation didn't work all that well. And it's certainly not working doing the slingshotting between the, I would probably let capitalism sort it out more than they are now. I will say EVs are pretty cheap to produce. We had Chinese cars in the studio the other day, and they have some pretty compelling EVs. And I think the populace would actually be compelled into an EV if they were a little better educated about them. I think a lot of people in the middle of the country who hate EVs, if they knew better, I think actually they wouldn't hate them. I think there's some real benefits. They're more reliable. They're cheaper to own. But also I think they can be made cheaply in a way. You're not developing an engine. Right? A gasoline combustion engine. And so these Chinese companies, we had a car in the studio the other day, called Xiaomi was the company. And they had 3 years ago, they were building cell phones only. And then they had a car that was tremendously competent 3 years later. And that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago when you had to develop an engine and get it certified by all these governing bodies, et cetera. And so that maybe will help bring the prices down. And in that situation, maybe more people would buy them. But for now, I don't know. China is adopting EVs without significant credits. The market there really wants these cars. And I think that would happen to our market too if they were priced right and if people...
That's interesting. If there were no tariffs to bring in a Chinese car to the United States,
people
they
in
would
Mexico
be
buy them.
So cheap.
They'd be cheap.
Like 20 grand for a new car.
Yeah, absolutely. Or 40 grand for a car that performs like a Plaid, but is a Model 3 price rival. They sell them in Mexico. They sell them in Latin America. They sell them in Europe.
Really?
Chinese electric cars. Yeah.